Farmers themselves are starting to see trends. They're responding.
While we're seeing changes in climate, we're also seeing farmers adapt.
Farmers have growing concerns about the impacts of changing temperatures and precipitation patterns on farm profitability.
Unless people are adaptable and unless people can think ahead, you're putting yourself in a pretty serious position.
Many are looking to reduce these impacts through management changes or implementing new technologies. This is referred to as climate change adaptation.
Hi, my name is David Schmidt, and I'm an agricultural engineer at the University of Minnesota and regional coordinator for the Animal Agriculture in a Changing Climate project. My father grew up on a farm and remembers well the Dust Bowl, the Great Depression, and working in the field with horses. In this photo, my father is the one sitting between his sisters and riding with his grandparents in a horse-drawn buggy. Here's my father, 85 years later, touring a new swine gestation barn, complete with a geothermal cooling system for the sows. Agriculture has changed significantly in his lifetime. Some changes have been driven by science and technology, developments in diet, genetics, feeding, buildings, equipment, and business structure, all resulting in producing more with less. Other changes have been driven by policy or regulations to make our food supply more safe and secure. World population growth, water availability, water quality, consumer demands, and concerns about agricultural pollution will likely accelerate changes in agricultural production. This will be a challenge for farmers across the globe. In addition, in many geographic areas, farmers will be challenged with significant changes in climate.
In this lesson on adaptation to climate change, we will be discussing both reactive adaptation and anticipatory adaptation. Reactive adaptation refers to the short-term adjustments that farmers make in response to current climate conditions. Anticipatory adaptation includes any long-term planning and changes made as a result of predicted climate changes. Both are important.
And farmers are already adapting. So you see farmers that are planting earlier, that are relying on larger equipment to be able to get into the field quicker because their planting windows are shorter and their seasons, springs in particular, have been wet across the Midwest and Northeast. We've seen farmers that are going back and installing more tile drainage and increasing drainage to deal with these wet conditions. And so while we're seeing changes in climate, we're also seeing farmers adapt to what they're seeing on the ground. Now that adaptation has been reactive. Farmers are responding to what they're seeing on the ground, what they've seen over the last 3 to 5 seasons, and trying to plan accordingly. And that's working for now. But as we look forward, we're going to see an acceleration of climate change. That's what all of the analysis is showing, is that the trends that we've been seeing, which have been about 0.2 degrees of warming per decade, we expect that to increase over the next century, where by the middle of the century we could be seeing 0.6 to 0.8 degrees of warming per decade. And at that point, farmers are going to have trouble keeping up if we just rely on reactive adaptation.
We will be discussing adaptation strategies, reactive and anticipatory, through the lens of a climate audit. We will divide the farm into 4 segments to help organize the audit. They are farm inputs, animal production, logistics, and farm exports. Some adaptation strategies may be short-term and will affect the farm's current management practices and decisions. Long-term adaptation strategies include things like investing in genetics, buildings, or equipment, or diversifying the farm. Making decisions about which adaptation strategies to implement requires data. Unfortunately, the data on future climate conditions is uncertain, and that can make decisions on whether to invest in long-term strategies more complicated as farmers weigh the cost of investing against the potential benefits.
Farmers are always looking for ways to cut their costs and ensure their profitability, and this would be no different than any other kind of technology that they would sit down and say, okay, I'm losing X number of sows that we're going to attribute to heat stress, and that's costing me Y dollars per year. If I put some kind of mitigation strategy in, whether it's a geothermal or whether it's just air source heat pump or something, and that system's going to cost me X, and it's going to cost me so much to manage it and keep it operating, and they'll do the math and say it'll pay back in 35 years. Nah, I'll wear the cost of the lost sows. If it's going to pay back in 3 or 4 or whatever their break point is, they'll say, yeah, we'll have a go at it, and then technology will get better and it will pay back quicker.
The farm audit begins with farm inputs. We will look at ways to reduce the exposure of these farm inputs to the risk of climate uncertainty. These inputs include water, feed, energy, young stock shipped onto the farm, and other farm supplies. Climate adaptation is also referred to as building of climate resilience, reducing climate vulnerability, or reducing climate risks. Reducing climate risks for the important farm inputs of feed and water will mean something different to farmers who grow their own feed versus those who purchase feed. It means something different for farmers who pump water from an aquifer than it does for those who get it from a river sourced by snowmelt. It may also be of greater concern for some than others, depending on local climate trends or climate projections. Many farmers are already adapting their feed systems to become more resilient. They are making changes in crop rotations, crop genetics, or in forage and pasture management.
I think that what is probably helping to reduce the effects of these changes are the way that we're managing the animals, managing the grazing. I'm using a planned grazing process where it's high density, short duration grazing. And so even when we get into those periods where we're having a summer, a drier summer, for instance, that we're able to get through that because of the planning process and because we're able to produce more forage. Because I know that there are going to be times when maybe I am going to have to sell animals if I don't have enough feed.
One of the most critical points is to manage stocking rates to match the pasture availability in natural grazing systems. If you don't do that, you end up overgrazing and you get longer-term degradation so that you get damage to the environment. And that's not helpful to the farmers in the long term in terms of income, but it's also not helpful to the environment. So the recommendations that we can make are to manage in advance for your stocking numbers, the number of animals that you hold relative to feed early, so to down stock early and to feed early. That's not, that's easy to say, but it's not easy to do in terms of feed costs and the capacity to offload animals. But that's the first recommendation. The second recommendation is to look to the future at how you can improve your grazing systems to be more drought tolerant in the species that you might sow into your pastures.
So those who can be proactive and get up on the early side of the drought and have that flexibility in their system to make management decisions ahead of time before that drought really becomes an economic devastation to the enterprise.
A lot of ways that individual producers try to prepare themselves better for drought is to improve the monitoring on their farm.
If we can improve soil health, improve organic matter in the soils, they turn out to be more resilient to extremes, both extreme woolly wet conditions and extremely dry conditions. And so soil health is going to be a key part of our strategy going forward. Genetics is another important strategy. We've seen improvements in the crops that we've grown over time, and that's resulted in improved productivity, but it also has resulted in crops being more resilient to things like drought. And so the crops we have today that we're working with, the soybean and corn crop in particular, is a stronger crop with stronger root systems, deeper root systems, and those plants are more likely to withstand drought than even the crops that we had 20 years ago.
One farm in South Dakota recently made news headlines with its comprehensive adaptation strategy to survive drought. This 5-point strategy involved adding more forage reserve, both standing and stored, managed grazing to build resilience in soils and grasses, storing more hay to supplement forage, monitoring rainfall and soil moisture, adjusting animal numbers after anticipating the future forage supply. Other short-term adaptations for farm inputs in areas prone to drought might include more efficient crop irrigation or planting drought-tolerant crops, better soil management to enhance water retention, additional capacity in stock tanks or farm ponds, integrated pest management programs, since climate change can cause new disease and weed problems for crops, additional feed suppliers or more feed storage on the farm, multiple suppliers of young stock. Increasing the farm building's resilience may require additional fuel storage or additional backup electrical generation if the farm's energy supply, fuels, or electricity are vulnerable. Long-term adaptation strategies for farm inputs should also be considered. Ensuring an adequate feed supply might require more extensive pasture or rangeland improvements. It may require changing crops or tillage to better match climate conditions. Water security may mean drilling new wells, installing new irrigation systems, expanding farm ponds, or purchasing water rights. Long-term adaptation might even include moving animals to other geographic regions with a better water supply. The animal production phase of the farm operation is also quite vulnerable to climate changes. Often, this vulnerability might show up in the form of heat stress on the animals. Heat stress may impact production and reproduction, and can also increase the risk of diseases and other animal health concerns. Short-term adaptation strategies to prevent heat stress in animal production should include more monitoring and better management of existing systems, making sure the ventilation system is working properly, adjusting temperature set points, monitoring animal behavior for signs of heat stress, making sure animal cooling systems are operational in the early spring and late fall, improved protocols for feeding in hot and cold weather, adding more watering locations, shade structures, or other heat abatement systems. Many of the short-term adaptation strategies for heat stress just described are already deployed on most farms. Proper cooling requires protection from the sun with either shading or building, followed by good air exchanges in any buildings and adequate air speed across the animals. Proper cooling also includes misting systems or soaker systems for animals that lose heat through evaporative cooling. It is also important to focus cooling strategies on areas such as the holding areas in dairies or wherever animal density is greatest. Farmers and animal production experts can describe the many benefits of implementing these short-term adaptation strategies for heat stress.
I would say spray cooling is probably the most common. One of the advantages of it, especially in loose housing where cows are feeding at a common feed area, is that's where the spray cooling would be. It would soak them, and usually it's a cycle of anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes. They'd soak them for 1 to 2 minutes, and then it would evaporate for the rest of the period.
For our sow farms, we have a cool cell system, which essentially is it's a filter before the air comes into the barn and cool water comes down to it. We can drop temperatures about 10 degrees at best from outside temperature. So for grill finishing, we're naturally ventilated, which we're counting on the wind. We're counting on outside temperature. We do have a mister system to replicate sweating for pigs. That won't go on until about 85 degrees. And we turn it on for about 10 minutes, and then we turn it off for about 20 minutes, or as long as it takes to evaporate everything, so you don't soak the pigs the whole time.
They'll stand up and try to get more airflow across them, so you'll see a lot more animals standing. Rumination will actually go down. You'll actually get a decrease in activity, so even though they're standing, they won't be walking around as much. They'll try to stand in one spot. And so all of these behavioral changes, not only can you pick them up and they have economic losses to the farm from a production standpoint, but with some of the technologies that we have today, we can identify these behavioral changes and then hopefully go in and make changes at the farm level to cool the animal or alleviate some of that stress. If I can pick up that this animal is starting to become heat stress and I can find out when that is and start cooling at that time point or wherever that is on the farm, then I Once I'm visually able to see a cow open mouth, panting, and saliva, the heat stress has occurred. The damage is done, right? So I want to be able to go in and try to start cooling and prevent that animal from getting elevated temperature and prevent her going into stress. Because once you can visually see it, most of the time, milk production and the other switches physiologically have already occurred. And so that's some of the challenges, is trying to identify heat stress before it happens. I think the other thing is, and I run into this a fair amount, people that have a lot of cooling put in, but they get so busy. There's so many things going on coming to spring with farming and school activities, to you name it. And so I'll go to a farm that has a ton of cooling technology, but they didn't clean the fans, or a third of the fans aren't working. And the shades on the side of the barn, half of them are still up because they forgot to pull them down to allow the airflow to come through. Or, you know, you look at the nozzle heads on the sprayers, and, you know, a third of those aren't working. So, I encourage the guys, make sure and just do a heat stress audit on your farm. Make sure everything's working, everything's clean, your nozzles are working and stuff well before summer hits. Don't wait till summer hits to go out there and start making the changes, because once this animal experiences heat stress, again, talking about damaging the eggs, and you'll see the effects for a month and a half, 2 months. Once the heat stress occurs, it's hard to recover from that. So catch it before the heat stress occurs, and cooling those animals at the very beginning, well before summer. Keep in mind, animals are comfortable at about 40 degrees. Lactating dairy cows are about 40 degrees.
A lot of our farms, the calves are raised in hutches, and we've had some challenges just of the hutches getting too warm. So making some of those adaptations where we can lift up the back end of the hutch, or we've had farms where they've cut out the back of the hutch completely and put a hog panel in there just to increase the airflow.
Long-term adaptation strategies for animal production can include continual planning and large-scale investments in animal genetics, farm buildings, and pasture systems. As one example, dairy farms in the Midwest are moving away from naturally ventilated barns to mechanically ventilated barns, which give animal producers better control over the environmental conditions inside the barn.
When we originally built these barns, they were to be naturally ventilated barns, but we didn't do it right. We built them in a little bit of a valley instead of on top of a hill where you get the nice breezes, and they aren't really tall enough. You need at least a 16-foot sidewall. These are only 12, so we were having problems with cows in the weather like we've had this past week. They'd bomb, they'd just drop 7 pounds of milk in 2 days because they just weren't eating anymore. They were just fighting the hot weather. And so I went out to South Dakota and looked at the cross-ventilated barns that were going in out there, and I said, well, this is how we can salvage these barns and continue to use them. So we made them cross-ventilated barns. When we put the cross-ventilation system in there, the soaker lines were controlled by a thermostat, and they just never came on again, so we don't use the soaker lines anymore. We just depend upon the air movement through the barns to keep the cattle comfortable. I knew what it cost us to cross-ventilate these 2 barns, knew what kind of milk we were getting out of these cows, and according to my calculations, it was paid for in about a year and a half.
Geothermal cooling systems, like this one in western Minnesota, are also being considered by some producers as a viable long-term investment for animal cooling.
The real problem, primarily from production or environment or weather, is summer. And we can get very warm temperatures, especially this part of Minnesota. So providing some way to provide cooling, like a geothermal system, is, I think, things that we'll start to see being investigated more. And in this particular case, they decided to invest in these facilities on a more permanent basis, just because of their business model that they're using here, which is different than you're going to see in most production facilities. This is a 900 sow facility, farrow to nursery site. They're incorporating a geothermal system, and I think which is reasonable in a production system like this. It has to be integrated properly into the ventilation system, and the system basically has to be probably sized to provide sufficient cooling that you can also but still properly ventilate the facility. Even though you can't see them, there are 360 wells that are approximately 220 feet deep, kind of all around this first facility. You can see each one of these little openings or inlets on the side of the building. Each one of those, there are 36 wells that service one of those openings, and that acts as the inlet and thus the way that they temper the incoming air. So the investment made is kind of can be thought of as controlling some of the risk, preventing some of the catastrophic losses that might occur from real extreme heat conditions, which would not only result in loss of gain or production, but might result in mortalities.
Producers are also making long-term investments in animal genetics, developing breeds that are more adaptable to future climate conditions.
The other thing that farmers are managing to do is to choose breeds more carefully that respond better to drier, hotter conditions.
A recent study of breed allocation in Texas beef cattle showed that heat-tolerant breeds such as Brahman are growing more prevalent in the warmer parts of Texas. Another category of farm operation that is vulnerable to climate change is farm logistics. This category covers a wide range of farm management practices, planning decisions, and technologies. In the short term, there are many strategies to consider to reduce the vulnerability of farm logistics to climate events. These include being prepared with backup power for critical functions around the farm, forming emergency response plans in case of extreme weather events, making sure ventilation and cooling systems are ready early and late in the season, storing additional feed for times of drought or flooding, developing plans for transporting animals in extreme heat, planning for the transporting of supplies into the farm or exporting off the farm when there is flooding, planning ahead for managing animals in extreme cold or blizzard conditions, building resiliency into the manure management system.
Really, your manure storage is something that you should be managing all the time. You know, do you have a field that it is appropriate to apply it? Is there a period of time when you need to apply it in preparation for a period that you can't apply? Mm-hmm. And so no matter how big your storage is, even if you have a 1-year storage or more, you really need to be looking all the time for appropriate places to apply it and keep managing it.
Building resilience into the manure storage system also means setting aside higher, drier ground for manure application or managing the manure storage so there is room in case of an unexpected large rainfall event. A producer with a 5,000-head beef feedlot in southwest Minnesota had given up on fighting the weather and decided to move most of his animals into a barn with slatted floors and a deep pit for manure storage. He determined that the added investment was profitable in the long run based on labor costs and animal performance. The final phase of the farm operation affected by climate change is farm exports. Unfortunately, farmers do not have much control over the market prices for their products. Natural economic cycles of supply and demand, as well as local and national economics, all play a role and are all impacted by climate and weather. In the short term, practices such as contracting for farm products is common. Farmers also participate in insurance programs to protect against farm losses. These tools may become more important in the future, and they may evolve as a result of climate and weather changes. Many farms are already more diversified in products, vertically integrated, or have farms in several geographic locations to hedge against climate uncertainty. Unfortunately, there is no simple way to determine the long-term benefits of some adaptation strategies due to the uncertainty of future weather events and of future climate impacts on the farm. For instance, it's likely animal scientists do not yet completely understand the full impact of heat stress on dairy cows. So how can one possibly quantify potential damage from heat stress and weigh that against the potential benefit of a heat abatement system? Long-term adaptation strategies are also more challenging, as these investment decisions must take into account economic outlooks that project 15, 20, or 30 years in the future. Climate predictions are uncertain, as are population numbers, consumer demands, and global markets. Because of the uncertainty involved in making these long-term investment decisions, farmers should consult with a team of experts in a variety of fields that look at all aspects of a farm's operation. These decisions may require knowledge of farm finances, management structure, equipment and facilities, as well as consideration of a farm's long-term goals. Experts can help farmers look at options and weigh the costs and benefits.
I do some transition planning and then some of the long-term planning, but I've noticed as we're doing more building plan, herd expansion plans, people are figuring out, all right, we need to have the electricity coming into the farm to run these fans. And, you know, maybe this year we can't afford fans and sprinklers, but what systems should we be putting in the new barns?
So what needs to be considered when you're looking at capital investment analysis will be what is going to be the impacts to yields, anything to do with returns. It could be price, it could be the quality of the product, and how that does impact the returns. Then also is how it impacts costs. What are the changes to cost structure? Does it increase, decrease the amount? Does this price change? And then what we're looking at is the deltas between the before and after effects of climate change, for example, in this situation. When you're talking about climate change, we're talking about 25 to 30, 45 years into the future, which is very difficult to predict. With other capital investment analyses, we might be looking at anywhere from 5 to 10 to 15, 20 years. And so you have a lot less time as far as risk involved, and so that's the main differences. But as far as the procedures, the analyses that you do, it's the same.
In this video, we tried to provide some examples of adaptation strategies or ways to become more resilient to climate impacts. In addition, we introduced you to a strategy or framework to help think about the many adaptation options. There is no one size fits all. Adaptation plans must be based on regional climate trends and specific farm impacts. Conducting a climate audit using categories of farm inputs, animal production, logistics, and farm exports may be helpful. Listing the likely impacts followed by adaptation options is also useful. Once this list is developed, the cost and benefits can be evaluated and decisions made. Nothing about adaptation planning is easy, but it is important. Thanks for watching.
Aloha and welcome to another episode of Hawaii Food and Farmer Series. I'm your co-host Justine Espiritu. This is my co-host Matthew Johnson. Thank you ThinkTech Hawaii for giving us this space to talk to folks that are part of our local food system. We like to bring on farmers that are growing food, distributors that are taking it around the island, and also feature institutions that are taking a special interest and programs that are focused on our local food system.
Great, thanks, Justine. And so, as always, please remember that we're here every Thursday afternoon at 4 p.m. And please join the conversation. You can either tweet in at ThinkTechHI, and you can actually even call in at the number shown below. And we actually had our first caller last week, and we didn't even know what to do. So, very exciting. So please jump into the conversation. with us today, we actually, a lot of times we talk to like smaller farms, but this time we actually have kind of like a larger, well-known ranch. So we have Taylor and Isis from Kualoa Ranch. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah. And even though, you know, Kualoa Ranch, I'll let you guys talk a little bit more about it, but you know, it's been around for a very long time and it's well known in Hawaii and Oahu and actually around the world. But really kind of some of the work that you guys are doing is relatively new for the ranch. So that's why we wanted to hear from you guys today. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having us.
To get started, Taylor, why don't you kind of start off, just introduce yourself and give us a little background. How did you get to be at Kualoa Ranch?
Sure. So again, Taylor Kellerman is my name, and I actually am from the windward side of Oahu. So being at the ranch is kind of a dream job, if you will.
Right on.
I got my start, like a lot of people, backyard gardening, but then ended up going to University of Hawaii at Hilo.
Okay.
Got my degree in tropical ag, and then worked for the pineapple industry for a very long time. Worked in vegetables as well, and then worked for the seed industry for about 8 years. And then just over a year ago, got the opportunity to come back home and work for the ranch. So it's been really, really cool ever since.
And then what is your title? What are you doing again at Kualoa?
My title is Director of Diversified Agriculture and Land Stewardship.
Okay.
So that kind of encompasses all of our diversified agriculture, our livestock, our aquaculture operations, as well as our conservation. And then just to kind of top it off, I cover the landscaping as well.
Okay.
So
great.
Yeah.
Awesome. And Isis, how about you? I know that you're someone who I've known for a few years now. We always would kind of see each other at different events where I was like, hey, you know, kind of like sort of knew each other, but not really.
Yeah.
So it's great to kind of get to know you a little bit more. And now we've been buying some product from you guys. So, but yeah, how did you get to Kualoa Ranch?
So my start was, I was always into botany and, you know, mostly into any botanical, you know, growing any kind of plants and things like that when I was young. And then as I got to university, that would seem like the only thing of interest was that, and I went to a big ag college in Northern California. So I pursued mostly ornamental horticulture at that time, and so but I was working on the university farm, which is about 500 acres of orchard crops, mostly like peaches, nectarines, you know, almonds, a lot of nuts, walnuts. And then I came out here in 1992. My grandfather lived here, and just really got involved in the ornamental horticulture industry in nurseries, and did a lot of managing of landscape nurseries and things like that. And then started about 2008, really got involved in more of the tropical ag program of growing a lot of fruit and vegetables. I always kind of had a backyard garden, like Taylor's saying, you know, and did that for myself, but wanted to do it on a bigger scale. And first kind of wanted to help others learn how to do it, and so it was kind of helping other people set up their own backyard gardens and things. And then ended up, I had this golden opportunity where Kualoa was looking for someone to start their diversified ag program, and I came over there and was able to get that job, and have just been the best job ever since. So been there for about 4 years now, and it's just been great.
Right on. Sounds like a perfect job for you.
Yeah, love it. Yeah.
So maybe you can kind of talk about, you know, if you guys are growing food, what's kind of your daily kind of activities, or is it something that's just how you're using the land, or is it kind of developed into programs for the employees or for the guests to kind of be a part of? If you can kind of explain.
Yeah, you know, the thing about how we're set up at Kualoa is it's unique, but I think it's going to be a good model for Hawaii's ag future. Because when you think about it, you look at the cost of everything, real estate and labor and everything. You know, it's a tough business as it is, and then you throw that and it makes it even harder. So what a lot of people have done is kind of what we're doing, which is turn to what we already have in existence, which is the visitor industry. So can you somehow, you know, mold the two together? And what I think that we've done a good job with is doing that, but still keeping a production-minded drive towards what we do. So in all of our agriculture and basically all of our food production, it's very important to us to produce a lot and to be able to feed community and to be able to not just kind of show people and say this is what we do, but then in reality there's not really a lot coming out of it.
Yeah.
So a lot of my day-to-day is working with people like ISIS just to kind of look at how you would just a normal farm, how you would in regards to what's the most productive way to do this, what's the best way for land utilization, what's the best crops to look at, test trials, even things like that. But then kind of pulling back and seeing, okay, well, how can we incorporate this and make this interesting to our visitor industry so that we can help support it economically with that side as well. So.
Because that may be how Kualoa is more well known, is a lot of the, I guess, activities happening on the ranch. So you guys have the history of being a lot of the set for a lot of Hollywood movies. Like what, Jurassic Park, King Kong.
I think there's been 25 Hollywood movies filmed.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then also some of the other rides. So it's neat to see how you're saying that you guys want to actually have the sustainable agriculture happening, but not just as a, hey, everybody look over here, there's Isis the farmer and just kind of doing your farming action, but it's actually a real productive farm. And it's almost kind of like, because I know a lot of other farms are trying to figure out how to incorporate ag tourism into their operations. It's almost like you guys are kind of going the other direction. Is that kind of a...
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a lot of it was, it's always been a cattle ranch.
Yeah, it's been a cattle ranch. That was the beginning of it. So.
Since 1850. So that's been kind of a mainstay. And I know throughout the ranch's history, they've tried different ventures. So the diversified ag model's not totally new. However, I think our approach to it, and ISIS is taking a very cool approach where, you can kind of tell them all the different things that we're doing, but all the different types of ags that are really make for a great, I would almost say like a backdrop to other things that we're trying to show our visitors. So some people come on to see movie sets, or they'll come on to try and adventure, but then they get to go and see some of our other areas, and it's a nice way to educate. It's a nice way to provide a backdrop, but then it's also a great way to produce food and have a viable economic model. So.
Cool. Yeah. And that's always been the biggest thing for when we were doing farmers markets and things, when we were out there actually selling our products that we grow or we produce on the ranch, is everyone really is always shocked, like, oh, we didn't know you did this at the ranch. We thought it was just tours or movies and things
Jurassic
like that.
Park.
So so it's like, it's great to always see that new attitude that people are realizing that we're actually a productive ranch, and we're trying to even grow more and more. And that's really our goal, is to try and utilize a lot of the areas to produce more food for the community.
So you're looking to keep expanding the amount of land that you're growing.
Yeah, we're continually expanding. Yeah.
And you guys have it's a Kualoa grown brand. Is that the brand that you're using?
So it's kind of a new approach where we have our oysters and shrimp. We do Pacific white shrimp. We have ISIS's, which is things like vegetables, orchard crops, potted ornamentals, cut flowers, things like that. Then you've got our livestock, and while they're all important to our overall business plan, they've all kind of come up independently. So we tried to look at, okay, what's a well-rounded way where we can just take everything we do and make it recognizable by one brand. So we kind of rolled it out during the farm fair, and it seemed to be received well. But to Ice's point, it's every time somebody came up to our booth and said, oh, I didn't know you guys did all this. It was like, yes, okay, we reached another person. So
And it's neat to hear that all these things kind of happened independently. And then now you have a really neat suite of different products that are available. Because obviously the beef, so you have the hamburgers that are available at the ranch. Can you get the beef? Can you get it anywhere else outside of the ranch right now?
So right now we harvest 8 animals a month, and the burgers at the ranch are all our grass-fed beef. And we also do prime cuts, your normal steaks that are available out of our visitor center. You can order them online. We don't deliver, but you can order them, and then you can come pick them up. That just kind of ensures your order. But recently, Paniolo's Cafe in Kailua, they carry our beef. And then most recently, Isis has been doing a great job with our laying hens. So we have a Kualoa Loco Moco at Moki's Bread and Breakfast.
Oh, wow.
In Kailua. So it's one of our grass-fed beef patties with a Kualoa farm fresh egg. So
nice.
Yeah.
And do you guys have your own cafe on site?
We do. Right now, the only thing that we do fairly robust number of people through there, so keeping up with the quantity is the toughest thing. So right now, the burgers and are the main things that we sell out of the cafe that could be linked directly back to.
They do sometimes they'll do specials with our shrimp or other products,
Yeah.
but majority it's just the grass-fed, the burgers. That's what we're doing.
Isaac, can you talk a little bit about the part that you're doing, like the different types of stuff that you're growing?
Yeah.
How many acres you guys on? Because you've been there 4 years now.
4 years. So
and was there this kind of growing happening before you? I think you said before.
No, there was when I first started there. It was almost like an area where it's kind of like a botanical garden where we had maybe about 20 different types of tropical fruit trees there. A great variety of things that were more for show than production, and so we've been kind of turning it more to production with those. And then when I first started, I contacted a lot of chefs and just said, what do you guys need that other farmers aren't growing, and what can we kind of work on? And so I was kind of in a position where I could kind of experiment with different types of crops to see what we could grow here, what would work, and then fulfill that niche that wasn't being met at the time. And so of course all the chefs gave me long lists of things saying, can you grow this? So that's where kind of we were doing a lot with our heirloom vegetables and things like that, where we've had some good success with those things like heirloom okra and eggplant, and then we've done a variety of different carrots and radishes and beets and just beans. And so we just kind of always trying different things. We even did artichoke that came out successful too. And
artichoke.
And people are telling me you cannot grow artichoke here, and it did well. So it's like so it's been really fun doing that. And then we've also started doing some of the more traditional orchard crops like papaya and apple banana and those types of things, things that we kind of needed for the ranch, as well as there is a market still for those things that I found, and that's kind of where we really branched out on our diversification of the ag. And then we also have a 3-acre shade house that it used to be an orchid farm that was kind of subleased to some farmers at that time, and so they have since retired, and so the shade house has come back to us. And so in there I've been doing some ornamentals like bromeliads, anthuriums, some orchids, and then we also kind of diverted some of the area to doing some crops inside there that were we start a lot of we do our prepping areas where we start a lot of our seed there and then take it out and plant down the field. As well, we started about almost 2 acres of cacao inside there as well. So, and it's doing really well. So, and we got new areas. We're constantly trying to do different things. And one of the areas we have ava. We're doing a lot of ava in there too. And we're trying to really do a lot more with traditional crops. So we're doing a lot of ulu right now, kalo, and a lot of banana, and just trying to I've been really involved with the Breadfruit Institute in Kauai and doing ulu distributions, and those have been really successful, where we're giving out ulu trees to the community and things. So it's been really enjoyable.
Awesome. It's cool to see or hear about the two different angles, food production to sell to the community, as well as then taking this kind of mission of specific crops. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to get right back to it.
For a very healthy summer, watch Viva Hawaii. We are here live on Mondays at 3 p.m. and we bring guests like our best health coach, Elena Maganto. Eat well and follow her tips.
Viva la comida saludable.
Hi, I'm Ethan Allen, host of Likeable Science here on ThinkTechHawaii.com. I hope you'll join me every Friday at 2 p.m. to discover what's likable about science.
You're watching ThinkTech Hawaii, Hawaii's leading digital media platform for civic engagement, raising public awareness on tech, energy diversification, and globalism. Great content for Hawaii from ThinkTech.
Aloha, I'm Chantal Seville, the host of The Savvy Chick Show. You can watch the show every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Honolulu time and enjoy how to be inspired and empowered. If you're a woman or girl, everyone is welcome, but it's really dedicated to you. And we look forward to seeing you. You can also find us on thinktechhawaii.com. See you soon. Aloha.
Aloha, welcome back to Hawaii Food and Farmer Series. We're here every day, every Thursday at 4 p.m. I'm your co-host, Justine Espiritu.
And I'm your co-host, Matthew Johnson. And as always, you can join the conversation through Twitter at ThinkTechHI. And you can also call in on the hotline, the number shown below. Great. So today we're talking to Taylor and Isis from Kualoa Ranch. And I was just saying during the break, we didn't actually give you guys an opportunity to give a little bit of the history of Kualoa Ranch. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So Kualoa Ranch, I would say, started with Garrett P. Judd, who is very famous in Hawaiian history because he was the first one to create a medical journal in the Hawaiian language. Oh, wow. So he became befriended very quickly and was, you know, a confidant and an advisor to the monarchy at that time. And, you know, Kualoa Ranch is actually 3 different valleys, or Aupa. So you've got Hakipu'u, Kualoa, which we're most famous for, and Ka'ava, which is where all the movies tend to be filmed. Okay. And while Kualoa was the first acquisition, the other 2 valleys came in the next generation of Judds. Okay. And now the whole place is run by or owned by the Morgan family. Okay. John Morgan being the president and CEO, and he, you know, he is the neat part about John is that he's created this empire, if you will, of you know, of visitor industry, yet totally dedicated to agriculture. In fact, most of the meetings that I have with him are around when are we going to open up new areas, when are we going to try these new things. So it's the opportunities that we get to just try things, I think wouldn't exist otherwise unless you had such a supportive management.
Yeah, it's amazing you're saying you're able to try out artichoke. I'm sure most places would be like, we're not trying that because that's not a crop that seems viable for Hawaii, but and here you go saying you had success with it. So that's fantastic. I mean, it seems like such a great spot for you guys to have that freedom to really go out and try different things and see what you can do. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
So then you said the department that you guys are working for is relatively new. Does that kind of represent more of that push to move along faster in that direction of producing things and growing more food?
It's kind of like a new spin on an old initiative where ag's always been key, ranching-wise. So the cattle is really, it's just evolved from really now we're a grass-fed beef operation, which, you know, before more of a cow-calf sort of situation like other places. Aquaculture, everybody knows our oysters. The oysters are grown in an 800-year-old fish pond. So
this is the only place in Hawaii that's growing oysters? Is that correct?
No, there's others that grow oysters. We are the only place on Oahu that's certified to retail them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, oysters being a raw product, it requires a certain amount of due diligence with Department of Health and everything like that, understandably so. Yeah. So, and then you look at that, and then you look at, you know, when you look at Isis's and all of his, I think the drive to have diversified ag was always there, but the level that he's taking it to and all the different crops that we're doing, that's definitely a new initiative. So think of it as kind of like old ideals, but with a new driver, a new spin. I guess.
We need the right team in place to be able to do it as well.
Yeah.
And we kind of mentioned briefly about ag tourism because a lot of the other farms that we've had before we were on the show and worked with as well, they're trying to figure out how to incorporate ag tourism into their operations. I know like Kahuku Farms, Kylie was one of the first, probably smaller family-sized farm to really kind of figure out all the red tape and kind of get their cafe up and going. Is that something, are you guys a resource for small farms? And is that some of the conversations you have with some of the other farmers in the community of different things that they can do?
Yeah, I always encourage, you know, other small farms to try and incorporate that into their model, you know, and it's something that can really help add to their revenue to become successful here is to bring people onto the farm and do some kind of tourism, whether it's workshops or just having, you know, schools come, like the way how Kahuku Farms they really hit that market with the schools coming in, and it's a great thing to educate others where the food actually comes from. So yeah, it's something that, you know, we, you know, personally try and encourage others to do that same thing. So it's something, you know, I feel.
Yeah, we actually look to Kylie a lot because the way that they have their operation there with the cafe is just amazing. I mean, the way they've set it up, and you know, we have a lot of scenarios that we're running over in our heads of how can we expand our offerings? How can we continue the model that we got going? And they're a great inspiration. Yeah, they do a great job. So, absolutely.
Yeah, well, it seems like you guys are doing a lot already. So what is kind of the longer vision, or how do you see it still evolving or growing? Just more land and finding more markets for your products, or still experimenting with adding on new products?
You know, I would say I'm going to give the practical approach, and then you can give the approach that you think is realistic, because that's where we work well together. So I go, how about this? And he goes, you know, you look at what we do. I look at it as like a three-siloed approach, right? We create products for people to consume. That's a main goal for it. You know, we want to feed community. That's one. Also, we also act as a backdrop for a larger business, which we've talked about earlier, which is the agritourism portion. But we also do a lot for what we like to call brand recognition. So when you look at our oysters, when you look at our grass-fed beef, when you look at these things that are specific to Kualoa, you know, Isis grows a terrific apple banana. You know, the trick is, how do we get people to go, oh, you know, Kualoa's bananas are unreal, just like they do with our oysters and our beef and other things. So that what we're trying to figure out is, what's the next thing? You know, you've got the cacao going, which I know has a lot of potential, but it's long range. Right. You know.
So trying to like pick your next kind of like niche product.
Yeah, and the unique thing about Kualoa is that we have all these different things, you know, with the livestock and with the aquaculture and then the diversified ag, that you know, I really see us kind of going more to a direct, you know, farm to table kind of approach, where we can offer majority of what you're eating is grown right there at the ranch. And so kind of going in that direction, that's a real important direction I think that we're headed towards as well.
That's not something that happens already with the events that, I mean, I know there's like a lot of weddings that take place there. Is there that catering option?
Well, we do have some events like the Outstanding in the Field has been there annually for the last, I think, three years. They've been doing that, and that's been a great event. And so we're trying to do more of those.
What is that, Outstanding in the Field?
That's a national event that goes all around the country, where it's an outside company, it's not part of Kualoa, and they just come to different farms and they set up and they take a local chef from the area, and then that chef will try and take as much product from the farm itself or from the close within, like the Ahupua'a, and serve everything from there. So Gooch has been the main chef, been doing it for us, and I think Pig and the Lady, did it last year.
I think they just did that at Small Kind Farm, right?
It's similar. This is different. It's a same idea but different. Yeah.
And I think they did it at Kahumana maybe one time, because they do it usually here and then they do it on the west side as well when they're in Hawaii. But if you go to Outstanding in the Field, you can see they're all over the country. They travel all over and do this.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
But you know, we're lucky where we have beauty and resource. So. You know, his point is right on the money, where it's if we can look at how we can invite people in to not only enjoy our products, but enjoy them at that location. You know, and you know, everybody talks about how the chefs are the new rock stars, and I'm a firm believer of that. So finding that, because you know, when you look at the traditional ag model, it's a tough run in Hawaii for sure. So I think that, you know, moving forward, how do we as a state look towards those different avenues and vertically integrate in that sense?
So Ted, one thing you mentioned that maybe doesn't get as much notice is the conservation work that you do on the ranch, and that kind of falls under your department as well.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that, like what that all entails?
Yeah. So the ranch itself is 4,000 acres total, and when you consider our pasture land, we're about 1,500 acres, and when you consider ag developed in other areas, you're looking at about 150 or so. So that's a lot of area that's just left in what we call range shed. So in order to conduct range shed management, which includes things like stream restorations, native species outplanting, invasive species eradication, as well as kind of maintaining important cultural areas, we employ 4 people dedicated just to that. We call them our stewardship employees. And it's a neat situation, and I always throw this out there as a promotion, because it's pretty amazing when you think about it. They're completely paid for by the ranch. So that's 4 employees without any sort of assistance from any sort of government body. That is just to maintain the environment from what it is. But when you consider that we farm in the uplands, midlands, and then we do aquaculture on the ocean. It's it's in our best interest to be good stewards and to manage our resources properly. So it's a big job. You know, there's a lot to it, a lot of moving parts, but it's also one of those things that, I mean, just to think that, you know, we get to participate in the management of that whole area is
just trying to preserve
pretty
and
cool.
keep that natural beauty.
It's 3 entire valleys à haut pois. I mean, that's a massive endeavor.
Yep, definitely.
Awesome. Well, we're out of time. That wraps that up. So thank you so much for coming on, and it's great to kind of hear about this fixture that's on the island and learn what you guys are kind of doing in food production and land conservation up there.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.